Good morning. Here we are again. I can always tell when it's a pretty day and the sun is shining because it gets everybody in a happy mood and there's lots of talk and lots of visiting and lots of smiles. So that's a good thing. If you hearken back to Psalms, it says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." All right. So, week 9 of The Kingdom of God is Like. So we've got 3 parables to talk about today. We're actually finishing up the group known as the Kingdom Parables. Now we'll have a few more weeks where we're going to combine in some things on, I'll just call it living in the kingdom. Some of it may extend a little bit on some of the parables. Some of it may be not disjointed, but not closely related to the kingdom parables. So anyway, we have 3 more to finish. As we said at early on, I think the first week, out of all the parables that Jesus taught, I believe the number is we have record of 43 parables, and 13 of them were begun with the words, "The kingdom of heaven is like," or "the kingdom of God is like." So here we are. We're going to kind of try to wind that up and then, as I said, move on to some other things. So the first one we're looking at today will be the parable of the seed and then the parable of the mustard seed. Similar but different. Both very short, and then we'll spend some time on the parable of the laborers or the workers. The first ones we'll be looking at are in Mark chapter 4. So the parable of the seed, an interesting bit of context, and hadn't really thought about it until I started looking at these parables. I'll say, but before I make that comment, Mark is known as being a relatively, short and straightforward gospel. It starts off early and then it keeps moving pretty quickly. So we said when we were looking at the parables from Matthew 13, like the parable of the soils, that it is believed that that may have been the first parable that Jesus used to teach. Not that parables didn't exist or teaching in stories was not a technique already, but it's believed that it could have been the first one because that was like the first one that we see when we read through roughly at least chronological Matthew and the disciples. We have it written and then they say, "Will you explain this to us? Why are you doing this?" So the idea is that for a while he was not teaching in parables, and then from then on that's basically all he did, except for when he was alone with the disciples. So that was the parable of the soils in Matthew 13. Mark 4 also records the parable of the soils. Well, this is really early in Mark. And I never really thought about it, but that gives you a little bit of the timeline if those are, again, at least roughly in chronological order. You get a long way through Matthew with a lot of the early life, and then you pick up Matthew 13 and Mark 4, probably pretty similar time frame because they have the same parables in it. The parable of the seed is also taught in Mark 4. And then the mustard seed that we'll talk about in a few minutes is in both Mark 4 and Matthew 13. So there's our context. We've in other places just kind of introduced or started this teaching of parables. And then if you look at it in context, it looks like several of the early parables that Jesus taught were about farming, were about planting seed. So we have a theme. They don't all interpret exactly the same, but we do have a theme. So that's our setup. If someone would read Mark 4, verses 26 to 29 for us, please.
And the seed should sprout and grow, he knows not how. The earth produces of itself first the blade, then the ear, and the full grain in the ear. But when the grain is ripe, at once he puts in the sickle, because the harvest time has come.
All right, thank you. So as we've been doing on most of these, let's look at the characters that are in this parable. Who's our main character? The kingdom of God is like a man. Okay, thank you. You know, we'll get into it. I'm going to hedge on whether that's the main character. I think it is, but I'll explain what I mean later. Okay, so there is a man. He's actually the only human in this story. So we could stop there, but there are some elements of the story that are also very important. The man was doing what? Scattering seed. So the seed is important in this story. And it says he cast his seed upon what? Upon the soil. I don't know if this one would be a strict parallel to our parable of the soils, but we're going to see certainly some similarities. What happens, hopefully, when you scatter seed? You know, this is kind of the time of year to work on your lawn and try to get it green. So you go to Lowe's, Home Depot, someplace, you buy a bag of seed. What do you hope happens? That's right. You scatter the seed in places where you want it to come up, or if maybe even more interesting, you put it in one of these little things that spin around your broadcast spreader and it throws seed everywhere. It scatters it for a wide range. So he was scattering seed upon the soil. What does he then do? I'm sorry? Nothing. Says he went to bed. He went to bed to let it do its thing. You know, when you scatter your seed, does it immediately pop up? No, it's got to germinate, it's got to sprout. Don't ask me the sequence of events. I'm way out of my element on that one. But no, it does not just immediately grow. It says the seed sprouts and grows, and I love this line. He himself does, how he himself does not know. So he's going to spread the seed, he's wanting it to grow, but he's just relying on faith that, I don't know how this happens, but I'm going to wait for it to grow. If we look at, and again, going back to these, this is the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and as we've talked over and over, we're interpreting these as the kingdom of heaven on earth is the church. So what do we scatter in hopes that it grows? The word, the gospel, maybe even more descriptive. So we scatter hoping the seed will grow. And I love this, you know, we don't know how it's going to grow. We expect some of it to grow in places here and there. Will it grow where the seed has not been scattered? Not much. Maybe if you get a good wind. But Jack? So we're wanting the word to grow. We don't necessarily know how it's going to grow, but we're going to leave it alone for a while. We're going to spread it. He probably prepared the ground where he wants it to grow. But then once it's in the ground, there's not a whole lot you can do. I guess you could water it. But you can't disturb it. You can't dig it up. So there are things you can do, but you're counting on that seed to grow in ways that you don't understand, you may not be aware of. So that's why I was saying I'm not sure that the man is the main character here. The seed might be. The seed certainly takes an active part in producing the crop here, at least in this personification. The soil also says the soil produces crops by itself. First the stalk, then the head, then the mature grain in the head. Parables are from our first week. They're just ordinary what? Stories. You know, he's describing an ordinary cycle of events, happens over and over. So, I might also say that maybe we should be about, that's here, maybe we should be about, in regularity, scattering the seed.
They're earthly stories with heavenly meaning.
Mm-hmm. And it's I think I mentioned this the first week, but it's been a while. A very well-known and very, very well-loved explanation, because it is. Parable comes from the same word as parabola, where two lines are getting very close together, but they're never touching. So there's that the heavenly side and the earthly side, they come alongside each other. And I started to say where one goes, the other goes, but the math kind of breaks down there. They're just straight lines. But
we have PowerPoint, television, and movies, and all that, but they didn't have any of that. And so parables were a way of really highlighting something that people could remember.
mm-hmm.
Where today, and I guess you had to be a good communicator back then because you didn't have all the accoutrements that we have, where maybe that hurts us in communication because we depend so much upon visual things instead of being able to communicate with people word to word.
That's right. And if you tell somebody a sequence of numbers, I'll just pick something at random, it's going to be very hard for them to go repeat that same sequence of numbers to someone else. You tell them a story, they can go repeat it. So you're right. Parables, as I've really enjoyed our weeks here with the Kingdom Parables because of some of the insight. What other insight can we get? I'm going to try to keep moving a little bit. I'll probably be wrong, but I anticipate our third parable will take up the bulk of our time. So I'm going to move on a little bit, but I want to give you a chance. What lessons do you think this simple parable can give us?
I think it's important to remember that the main thing is to spread the word.
You can try to water it yourself, but ultimately it's, God, as it says elsewhere in the New Testament, it's God that's going to give the increase, right? The main thing is that we have to focus on spreading the word.
That's right. And I wholeheartedly agree. And then to me, my take home out of this one is after spreading the word, we've got to let God act. That word, the gospel, we've talked about it in different ways. has to grow in that soil. Somebody has to be good soil and be receptive for that seed to grow. Tracy?
You don't know who it's going to touch and how it's going to touch who it's going to touch. Before COVID and before we had the live presentation on YouTube, I don't know how many people were reached, but now that we have that, we're reaching a lot of people that aren't even in the United States, that are far away. I remember when COVID hit, we were sitting down and we could see some people from overseas that were commenting on our sermon. So you don't know how it's going to touch who it's going to touch.
Jack?
Again, God, amazing lessons. He puts the cookies on the lowest shelf, down to earth, so to speak, so that we actually can relate to what he's.
Right, so we can relate to it. Yeah. In relation to we don't know, maybe how far it's going to go or where it's going to reach. As I've said, I'm basing these lessons on some material from the BibleTalk.tv website. And Mike, who runs that website, told the story that he became a Christian because where he lived, he was an adult, somebody placed an ad. I don't remember whether he said it was in a newspaper or a billboard or something, but they placed an ad for a church. And he saw the ad, went to the church, eventually became a Christian, became a preacher, and who knows, especially with, as we said, the internet and the website, how many people that he has spread the word to, that he said, to their knowledge, I guess the people at the church told him that he was the only one that responded, at least said that he came because of the ad. The guy who placed the ad left the church. The church he went to has ceased, or at least the congregation, I should say, has ceased to exist. So all of those things have broken down, yet that one ad, years later, has resulted in who knows how many people hearing the word, getting that spread. So yeah, we don't know how it's going to spread. We don't know exactly how it's going to grow. But yeah, I'm with Justin. We need to be spreading the seed and then letting God act on that.
Remember too that all seed is not created equal. Some seeds germinate and grow within a week, and it takes some 25, 30 years for full maturity. So
Right.
we're kind of like that.
That's right. Whether it's the different seed and then you compound that with the different soil. Some seed will grow quickly, some will not. Some soils are conducive to growing quickly, some are not. So there's all sorts of things that we don't really understand what is influencing that, but we can't give up on it. We've still got to be spreading the seed. And then I'll throw in, probably not spend time on here, it says, when the crop permits, he, the man, immediately puts in the sickle because the harvest has come. So we have to be ready to jump back in and help with the harvest. When things do happen, when that seed starts to grow, we need to be there and ready to cultivate and to help harvest. Okay, so moving on to the parable of the mustard seed. This one is also in Mark 4 and Matthew 13 with the parable of the soils. And obviously very similar to the discussion we just had. So this immediately follows the parable that we were on. So if someone would read 30 to 32 there in Mark 4.
Or what parable shall we use for it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which when sown on the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes larger than all the garden plants and puts out large branches, so that the birds of the air can make a nest in its shade.
All right, thank you. Who's our character? Non-human character. It's the mustard seed. It says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. All right, so I know everybody has heard a lot of this. What do we know about mustard seed? It's very, very small, yes. Maybe not microscopic, but it is small. And that is the main thing. Every time you hear this parable taught, that's the main thing that we start off with. So I had to do the same thing, I guess. I couldn't break tradition. But yes, it is small. But our parable says the kingdom is like that mustard seed. How did the kingdom start off? It started small. One man in Jesus came to the earth, and he started with a few disciples. And then he taught, and people started following him. He was teaching to tens of thousands. And then we get to the day of Pentecost, when Peter preached, and how many were baptized? 3,000. Like the next chapter, there's more. So start small, but boy, it branched out and it spread. When you hear those descriptions of the mustard seed, what do you hear? It's small. It even says it here. When sown upon the soil, the smallest of the seeds. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes what? It's large. Now, I'll be honest, when I was young, I kind of misunderstood this because, I was thinking, oak tree kind of thing. So apparently that's not the case. I was mistaken. But it could be 10, 12 feet tall. It's a sizable plant for something that you would, plant to grow. If you have a tomato plant or something in your garden.
Arid area, that's probably very large for any tree that would grow.
Yeah, that's right. Certainly in the area of Israel, it's known for being more arid. Now you do, not far away, hear about the cedars of Lebanon. So not everywhere in that part of the world would be arid, but yeah, you would think that people would be familiar with something that looks like this picture. So the mustard tree, starts small, starts with a tiny seed, can't talk this morning, and then grows to a sizable plant. It has branches that spread out. It says, forms large branches with the result that the birds of the sky can nest under its shade. So we have great influence from this tree. It starts small and then it affects many. Depending on your translation that you're reading, you may have a different type or a reference there on that last line. The birds of the sky can nest under its shade. There are references there to Ezekiel. And I wrote down the wrong verse. I was off by one. So Ezekiel 17:23, on a high mountain of Israel I will plant it, that it may bring forth boughs and bear fruit and become a stately cedar, and birds of every kind will nest under it. They will nest in the shade of its branches. So there's an allusion to Ezekiel in some of his teaching. There's also perhaps a reference to Daniel. When he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, he talks about, had conquered a large area, so it was of wide influence at the time as well. What did the birds get from the tree? I'm sorry? Shade. That's right. It was a place of shelter for them, a place of rest. So where are our lessons on this one? If the kingdom is like, if the church is like a mustard seed, what are our lessons? That's right. It's one little thing can have a big impact. And whether it's, one person saying something to their neighbor, or their coworker or their classmate, whether it's one small thing that a congregation does, reaches out to the emergency room next door, these little things can have huge impacts. And we can tie this together to the one we just talked about. We may not know. We don't know how it's going to work. But yeah, I think the main thing we see here is small beginning but large impact. Any other comments before we move on to our third one? Tracy?
I think as it becomes larger and all plants and puts out a lot of branches, as we become larger and as we grow, we need to remember that so that the birds of the air can nest and have a place of rest and shelter. There should be a place as we stretch out and grow for people to feel sheltered and safe, not unsheltered and safe, for lack of a better word. But keeping in mind that as we grow larger, this should be a place where people feel that shelter and rest.
Right. The church should be a place of refuge, a place of comfort and shelter. We should be drawing in those around us. It should be a good place to come. We should be welcoming and helpful in life, whatever it takes, because those are just more and more seeds that are planted. Okay, so of the three, my favorite for today is the parable of the workers. This one is Matthew 20, so we'll have to change if you're still there in Mark 4. We were talking about maybe some chronology earlier. By the time you get up to Matthew 20, if this is all chronologically recorded, it's starting to get fairly late in the ministry. I'll set the stage a little bit right at the end of chapter 19. Peter is, as is often the case, it's Peter. Peter is talking to Jesus, and he's talking about, we've left everything and followed you. What is there going to be for us? And Jesus starts in on his reply, and he's talking about eternal life and the gift of that for people who have left houses or brothers or sisters, etc. So then he tells this parable. So I broke this up into 3 parts, so nobody would have to read the whole thing. But if we could do verses 1 to 5, 6 to 10, and then 11, 16, just if you have the second or third one, just jump right in when we get to you. Go ahead and start off.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarii a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same.
And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, "Why have you been standing here idle all day long?" They said to him, "Because no one hired us." And he said to them, "You too go into the vineyard." And when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last group to the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. And then those hired first came, they thought that they would receive more, and they also received each one a denarius.
And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you are making it equal to us who are born the first of the day, and spoken to eat. If you apply to one of them, I feel you no wrong. If you do not agree with me for a denarius, take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this last worker as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last."
All right, thank you. Once again, who are our characters? We have workers. We have several sets of workers, but we have workers. And a landowner. So the kingdom is like a landowner who went out and hired workers. Put yourself in the worker's place. The people who were hired at the beginning of the day. At the end of the day, they saw that the people hired later were getting paid the same amount that they were expecting. What did they think? What were they do? Yeah, we should get more. Well, they only worked an hour, and they got what we thought we were going to get. So, man, if you multiply that times however many hours, I'm going to be getting a lot of money. Maybe not the exact math, but from a human point of view, was that unreasonable?
If you wanted to throw out everything that they had already agreed to, that would be normal, but yet they forgot about what they had agreed to.
That's right, they did. So the landowner says, you agreed to this. What's the problem? Now I have to admit, I kind of sympathize with him because you look at it and we're used to or at least, well, these days maybe not. Traditional values are the more work you do, the more output you have, the more you get paid, right? That's tradition. That is the way it is supposed to work. The more productive you are, the more you get paid. And some people, in fact, are even paid on a per item or per accomplishment. So that's what we have kind of ingrained in us. So yeah, you got to feel for them just on a human basis, because that's the value system that is common. But then you have the landowner. Now, he did some interesting things. It's not necessarily surprising that, he hires people at the beginning of the day. Maybe he looks at it and says, man, they're not going to get done. We wanted to have this much work done, and we're not going to get there. We need more workers. That's very easy to understand. So he goes out and he hires more people. what does he do at the end of the day? When it's time to pay the workers, what does he say? When the evening came, he said to his foreman, call the laborers, pay their wages, what? Yeah, starting with the last ones. Do you think he did that intentionally? Yeah, I think so. If he had started with the people from the morning, at least for our story, would there have been a lesson? No, they'd probably taken their pay and left. But for this story, somebody said something? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, some would. Yeah.
You know, until the later workers were introduced to the point we've already made, I agreed to this amount. And had the owner not gone out and gotten more workers, we would have gone through the entire day, I would have received my amount and moved on. So it's not that I feel like I get more because I worked more. It really is that introduction and that, I guess, greed or something of those workers. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's definitely a. Let me start the statement over. What do we like to do? We compare ourselves to the people around us, don't we? And it probably doesn't matter what situation we're in. You know, if you're at work, you're comparing yourself to your coworker, especially when raise time comes around. And you're thinking, well, I wonder how good a job did he do this year, or maybe it's something simpler. Maybe it's, man, look at that guy. As a matter of fact, I was thinking this the other day. Somebody across the street from us has much nicer looking lawn than me, but I recognize he puts way more effort into it than I do. So yeah, we're always comparing ourselves to the people around us.
Those who went through so much trials and tribulations, being tortured and eaten by animals, what would they look at and say, wow, they got it easy. They worship in air-conditioned buildings. We had to worship in caves. And look at this.
I'm glad you went there. I've already kind of talked about this. One of our themes is work versus payment. So yeah, what are some applications for us? Let's go back to his immediate audience. The church hadn't even been established yet. Go ahead, Mark.
I think there's an application that we tend to overlook a lot, but it's, you might say that these folks earned what they contracted with. We can't earn our way into heaven. So the pay scale doesn't matter as far as heaven is concerned. It is whether we are actually workers in the kingdom, not what we've contracted with God, so to speak, I get paid more because I've been in the church longer. It's not on our accomplishment that it matters.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
This could be a possible application. When I was younger, I had an older brother and a very much younger sister, and I always accused my mother of having 3 children so she would have a permanent workforce. My job was to periodically wash the picture window, which I can tell you still had 128 panes in it. And I spent half the time going to find my brother to see what task he had been assigned, and if it measured up for the nasty job I had of washing the windows. And my mother finally told me one day, she said, you know, if you'd quit checking on David, you'd be done by now. And I don't know if I ever put that into practice, but that's what I think of when I think of these poor laborers.
I don't think it's a bad comparison. And it goes back, the word comparison, it goes back to we're always comparing ourselves to the people around us. I jotted down some possibilities here. I hit a couple of examples. You know, when the church was established, it was established with the Jewish people, but then it was opened up to the Gentiles. Do you think the Jews had this feeling with the Gentiles? They don't deserve this. And in everyday terms, and to Mark's point, you know, you'll have Christians that are lifetime in the church. They grew up in the church, wonderful people. They live to a ripe old age, and who knows how many Bible classes they've taught, how many times they've spoken or opened their house to someone. And then you have someone maybe comes to the church late and had a horrible life before they became a Christian. Is it easy to compare ourselves if we're that Christian that's been there a while? Jamie, did I see?
In this story, it's sort of like mind your own business, stay in your lane, do your work, and leave it alone. But in your scenario there, wouldn't it be more heavenly to rejoice that that person was getting the reward?
Yes, it would be. It's a wow, man, windfall for you, right? Go ahead.
Unless someone waits till later in life to become a Christian, look at the blessings they miss.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I just don't look at it that way, that, you know, they're new Christians, so they don't deserve
That's right.
as much as heaven as I do.
I think, and that could be a better way to look at it, Charles.
Interesting that when the landowner hired the first laborers, he gave them a specific amount. The rest of them were hired, you will be given what is right. So the Jews, you know, they had this laid out. They were God's chosen people under the old law, and now here they had this opportunity of having received this first. When God sent the ministers to the Gentiles, it's sort of like those, well, I'll pay you what's correct, what's right in this. And the entire scenario is that everyone, regardless of what their abilities are, some have a lot, some don't, but it's the kingdom of heaven. Mm-hmm. And if they all had been told you will be given this amount, then it could have caused those that were there the first to lose heart. And mention about the Christians that have spent their entire life in the church and have done so much. They don't want to lose heart. You want to see them continuing on, mm-hmm, all through their life until God calls them home.
Yeah, and you emphasize the word, I think, because I heard it more than once, that the landowner said, I will pay you what is right. You know, their idea of right and God's idea of right are not the same thing. Tracy?
Another message we could get from this too is we don't know what happens at the last minute in someone's life. We can look at their life and say, well, they were never a Christian, but at that very last minute between them and God, we don't know what goes on. You know, they may have, who knows? I have a cousin that's what I don't know what happened at this last minute in his life. I don't have that assurance. That's between me and God. And I think that's part of the thing is it could be the last person, and stop comparing yourself. You know, we look at the chapters, and we think it's all, you know, different discussions. This was right after we had this discussion, and, you know, he purposely, he knows what he's doing, he purposely did this first and last thing, was last and first, because he had just had this discussion. So he's saying, stop comparing yourself, just do my work.
Right. And I skipped over earlier when he was talking with Peter, the last verse of that paragraph, right before this chapter starts, he says, the first will be last and the last will be first. Then he finishes this parable and he says the same thing. You think that's tied together? I think that's tied together. We are out of time. Matter of fact, I think I'm a couple of minutes over. Thank you for the discussion. I knew this last one would be fun. We'll see you next week.